Welcome to Brewing It Over with Cup North, the show that gives you the chance to deep dive into the topics shared in the content programme at our events. From social to consumer to sustainability issues, there's something for everyone. I'm Hannah Davis.
And I'm Grace Talbot. And today we are joined by Will Kenney from 200 Degrees. Will has always loved and worked in hospitality, becoming a coffee obsessive in 2001 when joining the Coffee Police, training and managing coffee quality for some of the UK's best loved brands. Over the following 20 years, he has worked with many of the leading operators to support and develop their coffee programs before joining 200 Degrees as the business continues its growth in helping more people drink better coffee.
Before we welcome Will to the podcast, don't forget, if you want to listen to his presentation from Manchester Coffee Festival in 2022, hang on until the end of the podcast to hear the full recording.
Welcome, Will.
Hi guys, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Excited to speak to you both.
Excellent. That is the answer we always look to hear. Okay, so we want you to feel very relaxed, and we also want to give our lovely listeners a chance to get to know you a little better. So I do have some pre-prepared questions. They are very difficult, so be prepared. Starting in hot.
Sat with bated breath.
What's your coffee order?
Oh, good question. Oh, see, I just like to be that kind of awkward person that doesn't have a standard go-to. So I think it totally depends. I think, most of us have worked in coffee for a while. You have different coffee needs at different times of the day. So yeah, I'll sit there and just kind of slope in the corner with a latte if need be, or I might be thinking actually I've got a bit of time. I want to brew this amazing single origin Kenyan that we've just sourced. So yeah, it totally depends.
Okay. Where we're finding you today on the precipice of recording this fantastic podcast, what coffee would you be ordering if you were joining us in a coffee shop?
Probably something on whatever the shop had on batch brew, I would think.
Nice, batch brew. Wonderful. Okay, yeah, it's always a strong choice. We will get our fantastic expert barista, Hannah, to go and pour you that batch brew. And while we wait, can you tell me, in your dream cafe, when you're about to sip this batch brew, what music is playing?
That's quite some. Again, being a bit kind of eclectic and pernickety, I think getting the ambience in any kind of environment is like super important. For me, just nothing too intense, nothing too hectic. Just nice, good, solid background ambience. Probably a playlist that my brother has pulled together because that's literally what he does for a living. He designs playlists. So, I very rarely have to actually think about what music. I can just go to, his Spotify list and get something that ticks the boxes.
Amazing. The world we live in where we have siblings whose professions it is to create playlists. I love it. Love it. I personally really like going into a coffee shop where there's like a favorite song of mine playing because I think I'm quite a needy person and it makes me feel seen and like I belong to something. So I'm always happy when there's like a bop that reflects me and I'm like, oh, this place is for me. But you're obviously not as needy as I am.
No,
Okay,
absolutely.
so last question.
Hmm.
What is your most memorable cafe experience?
I'm going to slightly flip the question. So not a cafe experience, but in terms of a coffee experience, I think for me, I was lucky enough to volunteer, and anyone listening who's interested in coffee should definitely volunteer to support coffee events. And it was in Gothenburg, and it was the first time I'd ever had a natural Kenyan at the Nordic Barista Cup. So it was super high grade. I'd never tried anything like it. So in terms of those coffee epiphanies that we've all had at one time or another, that was definitely the moment when your eyes are open to the taste possibilities that are out there within the world of coffee. And I was already sort of 5 or 6 years in at that point, but I think I knew from that stage there was always going to be so much more to learn. And that's the joy of coffee. That's why we're here today.
I love it. Yeah, this is it. When you talk to people who have fallen in love with coffee, so many of us have that story where we drank X for the first time. For me, it was a natural Ethiopian, and I still remember it. I was like, coffee can taste like this, and it opens that door, doesn't it? And it keeps you opening every door that you realize is behind that door. It's magical.
Yeah, absolutely.
We love it.
And you think there's there's probably 3 or 4 moments like that you have every few years that just keeps that level of interest as as the boundaries of what's possible and what you discover keep growing.
Absolutely. There's no end to learning, is there?
Yeah, well, we would fully advocate for volunteering at events, obviously. I actually volunteered at a World of Coffee in Vienna many moons ago, and I had been in the coffee industry for a few years, but yeah, it was a pretty memorable experience in terms of like marking me getting into specialty coffee, I suppose. So
yeah, definitely. And also it's that whole way of giving back and supporting the community and helping others that are coming through and learning, and just a great way to have an excuse to be there and connect to people you might not otherwise speak to.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so if anyone wants to volunteer at our events, you know where to find us. So for our listeners who didn't catch your presentation at Manchester Coffee Festival last year, can you start by giving us a 60-second overview of your talk from the festival?
Yeah, absolutely. It was sort of driven by the process that we went through when we were reformulating our kind of our coffee program and in particular our packaging. And it was really driven about trying to get to the nub of understanding of how and why consumers choose coffee. And bluntly, coffee is pretty intimidating if you don't have inherent knowledge of the product that you're buying. And so it was a beginner's guide to buying coffee. Essentially, there was nothing overly complicated or jargony in there. It was just, okay, I'm an average person at home. I know I like coffee. I go to a coffee shop. It's great. I want to start making coffee at home. I want to start buying better coffee. How on earth do I get to something where you're not in a situation where you're paying 10, 15, 20 pounds for a bag of coffee and it tastes awful because either you can't brew it properly or it's not what you expect it's going to be. And nobody wants that crushing disappointment of spending money on something that doesn't deliver what they'd hoped it would do.
Yeah, there is something rewarding, even if you buy a coffee that you don't necessarily enjoy the kind of in the cup experience of, if you still understand that you brewed it in the right manner for you, you can kind of make that distinction that, okay, this just isn't a coffee for me. It's not that like I've been, I don't know, missold a certain experience based on the information on the bag. In your talk, you spoke about like the paradox of choice. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit further for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't even begin to start taking any claim for this, but there was a study that was done, I think, back in the early 90s, and it used the example of getting consumers in a supermarket to choose and select jams. So, there were 2 different routes they went down. One where they had a table with 24 different jams on it. And then the second comparative set was a table with 4 jams on it. And to start off with, more consumers would stop by the bigger table because there's lots of eye-catching things to look at. But actually, when it came down to making a buying decision, far, far few people made that choice to buy because they were effectively overwhelmed by the choice of, do I want strawberry jam or do I want bramble jam or do I want seedless strawberry jam? And so the idea being, and the general sort of philosophy that was taken as a result of that study, and I'm doing that no justice whatsoever, was effectively, consumers like to have choice, or they think they need lots of choice, but actually it's far easier to make any kind of decision when you limit the menu, when you limit the selection. And I'm the classic, I have zero patience when I go to a restaurant and you get, 15 pages of different options. Like, that's just too much. I literally want someone to give me 3 or 4 choices. I could just choose something. It's nice and easy. So that's the kind of the general theory about the paradox of choice, that just too much is overwhelming.
Yeah, I relate to this almost aggressively. There's a local cafe here where I live in Somerset, and they've got to know me now, and they make me brunch because their menu is too much and I am incapable of choice. And that is one of my favorite kind of consumer experiences, is where they just bring me delicious food. Half the time I don't even know what I'm eating, but I am living my best life.
Yeah, absolutely. I can very much relate to that. It's just, or the classic thing is, you go out with a group of friends or family, and it's a big table, and it takes half an hour for everyone to decide what they want to order because people change their mind, and it's
Yeah.
Um,
and then you get hangry, and that's when you fall out.
Yeah, never good. Or another example that I used is, and you'll see this quite often if you go into any kind of big supermarket and you stand in front of the coffee selection, or even down the wine aisle. The wine aisle's the best one because there's more people there, and you'll see if you stand there, you can see the same people stood there for 10 or 15 minutes picking stuff up, putting it down, and my gut inclination is only about 3% of those people actually know what they're doing. The rest of us are just going, oh, what's the difference between this one and this one? And I like that label better than this one. It's
I like that label. I think is probably heavily featured in that decision making.
Yeah, totally. And so we just tried to use a lot of that experience and a lot of the research we did with our consumers to go, well, how do we? It's not about how fancy or complicated we want to make the labels and the journey. Just because we know what we're talking about, it has to be accessible so that people can get to, understanding, learning, loving specialty coffee.
Yeah, that's really great. And people should definitely hang on for your talk at the end of this podcast, because it's full of useful information to help you as a consumer navigate the world of buying specialty coffee, which can be a bit of a minefield at times. At the start of your talk, you mentioned that you should know what brewing method you plan to use before buying the coffee. Like, that's one of the 3 things I think you mentioned that you should kind of go into the coffee shop with. But I just wondered, what kind of coffee would you recommend for like a mocha pot as opposed to a V60 or espresso?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, kind of Grace, you were saying earlier on about, trying to actually make sure that the coffee that you buy meets your expectations. And, coffee is that wonderful, kind of commodity product that it's not like opening a can of drink or a bottle of wine where, 99% of how that product is going to taste has been controlled by the person who's produced or manufactured it. Coffee, it's almost the flip side. So much of it is down to what we do as consumers when we're brewing the coffee. So using the examples of a mocha pot where you've got less nuance and control over the brewing method, it's quite aggressive in terms of the way the heat's applied to the coffee, versus a V60 where you've got much more interaction and manual manipulation of what you want. At that point you might say, well, actually, a mocha pot, you want something that's a bit heavier, a bit darker roasted potentially. It's you don't want to go for a super light, delicate floral coffee where actually that brewing process of the mocha pot is going to diminish a lot of the characteristics that you inherently want that made you choose that coffee in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point of view on it, isn't it? Because a lot of us, particularly at the festival, kind of inhabit the specialty world already. So I think we forget or take for granted sometimes how much implicit knowledge we have. So when we're looking at these kind of product descriptions, we're bringing a certain amount of knowledge already. The kind of big part of your talk that I resonated with was the accessibility point of view, is kind of bringing this more niche world into an environment where, say, I always use my poor mother as an example, but where she would feel comfortable kind of interacting with a product. You referenced, people don't always feel super confident with Spanish words. My mum is definitely the type who would butcher the pronunciation and then feel terrible. So just avoid the whole element. Can you tell us a bit about your bags and the information you put on them, and why you've deemed that essential over other elements?
Yeah, definitely. We wanted to try and almost give the consumer a decision-making tree to follow, or a process to follow, so they've got different angles to be able to have accessibility into the range. So, previously we used craft bags for all of our coffees, didn't matter what they were. So it's quite overwhelming when you look at maybe 5 or 6 different products, and there's no immediate visual cues to make you understand what's the difference between the first one and the 6th one. So we initially split it down into having black bags for our house core products. Our guest coffees then went into white bags, and they say in big letters on the front, house beans and guest beans. So if it's that oh, actually, I loved that cappuccino I just had. I'd like to buy some of that coffee. That's really, really easy. If you're, then wanting to go down the guest route, the next level of sort of categorization we did was to try and have color coding at a very, very simple level. So we've got coffees from the Americas, are one color, African coffees are another, and then sort of Asian coffees are a third color scheme. Again, go back to the wine analogy. People remember labels. You might not remember that it was a natural process Sidamo that you had last time. But if you're getting into the world of coffee, you might remember that you bought a label. It was a pink label, and so you go, okay, well that's at least a bit of a starting point. You've helped to narrow down and take some of that choice to get you to a point where you feel a bit more kind of comfortable with what you're choosing. And language was definitely a big thing. The research that we carried out, definitely reinforced the fact that any sort of non-native English words, so they can be some African words, they can be sort of localities in Indonesia, and Spanish is the classic one. So much of the kind of coffee we buy is talking about the particularly from Central America, and if people can't pronounce the name, they don't know how to say the name of the farmer or the region where it's come from, it's far more difficult to then have a conversation with the barista and say, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about this? Or to reach, point behind them and say, oh, can I have a bag of, whatever it may be. So it's having those layers of accessibility so people can feel confident to pick up a bag of coffee and, have a bit of a stab as to what they should expect from it.
Bringing in, admittedly, it's been a little while since I've been a barista, but a barista perspective on this as well. Much to my shame, there were a lot of times where we had guest roasteries kind of featured, and I wanted to have that conversation with people about it, but I, as the barista, felt uncomfortable knowing that I wouldn't get the pronunciation correct. So it works both ways. It's not just the consumer in this transaction, particularly if you're, as you do in your talk, advocating for people to go into their local coffee shops and chat to the baristas. It makes it more accessible to them as well, I think, to be able to confidently talk about the coffee and understand it and not have that fear of like being perceived to be a bit stupid because you can't say the word correctly.
And yeah, I totally agree. Sort of anecdotally, one of the things that we knew was when we were having regular rotating guest coffees on the bar, there was one, there was two or three particular standouts that when we were looking at the volumes, they were much, much higher than others. And there was no conceivable reason, similar kind of processing methods, nothing radically different. It wasn't like we were starting to put a sidra on as, and it was massively more expensive. But it was just down to the fact that it was easily identifiable. The baristas felt super comfortable saying the name of the actual, that had been given to the coffee or the region it was coming from. And anything that was really complicated and difficult, we just didn't see the same level of because, if the barista, like you say, if you're not comfortable to not, sell, explain, engage with your customer, then they're not going to take that risk if you're not comfortable.
I was just going to, briefly ask, I know you do touch on this in the talk, but in terms of the producer and the farm representation, obviously the fact that perhaps we aren't multilingual shouldn't necessarily work against their representation and the work they put into the coffee. If people want to know that, if they want to go a bit deeper in terms of the information about the coffee they're buying, is that information available to them on your bags?
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's just at what point you introduce the consumer to that level of detail. So, once they've got to the point where hopefully they've picked up the bag, they feel comfortable, even just getting people to that point of turning the bag over and feeling, confident to get to that next level. So all of our coffees have a QR code on the back because that's the easiest way to make sure you can share lots of details. So the hyperlink takes you to the website where it'll give you details, pictures, all of that level of kind of story and background that lots of us want, that you can't possibly fit into a label on the back of a bag. So, if there's a few good things that came out of the pandemic, the fact that everyone now knows how to use a QR code has definitely helped, because it just allows allows you to tell those stories in so much more detail than previously you never ever would have been able to on the back of a coffee bag.
Yeah. Do you have any like phonetic spelling or little audio clips of any of these harder to pronounce words on the website, or is this something we might see following this podcast?
We don't, but I love that idea. I'll gladly steal that, and if we manage to find a way to put it in, we'll give you a little credit somewhere on the footer.
I love a phonetic spelling. I'm always looking for that.
Yeah, no, it's we just try to make sure that we kind of keep it as straightforward and as accessible as possible. I think a lot of experts in any type of subject can end up being so wound up in their own little thought process and bubble. And part of all of our jobs in terms of encouraging as many people to come and experience specialty coffee is you need to break down those barriers and let them know that actually it's not that complicated. You can learn and understand and grow your knowledge, knowing that 20 years later you could still be discovering something new almost every week.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's kind of our sort of responsibilities, really.
And do you think one of the challenges then, because a lot of consumers are used to buying coffee in the supermarket where the coffees are often given names, perhaps, like what you've done at 200 degrees, but then they're also often labelled with like a strength reading. Do you think that's helpful that those supermarket brands do that? How do you feel about strength on the side of a bag?
We had lots of very kind of contentious conversations and discussions around this, because bluntly they're pretty redundant and they're pretty meaningless. But actually, when we surveyed our consumers, it was one of the number one things that people look for in terms of giving them a visual cue and a guide as to what they could expect from it. So it's not something that you can be absolutely held over a barrel to, because it's an abject chart and scale that we've created. But there is just those people who go, I want something that's going to be darker, heavier, quote unquote stronger than something else. And also it just helps manage expectations. So if you've got a Brazil blend, our house blend, which is primarily brewed as espressos that people drink in the shops, versus very, very delicate, light and fruity guest coffee, you need to have some way of showing people they're not the same thing. And if you expect the same thing, either way, you're going to end up being disappointed. So I totally kind of sympathise with the fact that the comments that people will make, that it's not really meaningful, but like that's the reality. People who are buying specialty coffee for the first time use that as something that helps them understand and get to what they want.
Yeah, I suppose it's about understanding kind of the distinction between a consumer's use of the word strength and what they mean. Within the industry, we get very used to using strength in a certain way, but largely, and I'm kind of generalizing here, but consumers, when they talk about strength, are speaking to perhaps darker roasts or that more of a like punch in the mouth kind of feel. Do you think that there should be more onus on kind of specialty businesses to educate our consumers?
I think there is. I think lots of, again, the joy of particularly the UK specialty coffee scene is that lots of people want to be able to help educate consumers, and there's loads of examples of people who do great things in terms of open events or cupping or roast house days, whatever it might be, to engage people and get them in. Ultimately, you have to accept that not everybody wants to be educated about coffee. They just want to get to that product and and feel comfortable with it. And there's different degrees and levels of enthusiasm and thirst for knowledge. And there's nothing wrong if people just want to get to the point where they go, actually, that is the type of coffee I want. I'll buy that forevermore and I'll be happy. So we all should be open and accessible to consumers asking us questions and helping educate, but you can't ram that down to people's throats, because a whole lot of people just, they don't want that level of detail to what could be, just a commodity purchase in some instances for them.
Yeah, we can't demand everybody has the same level of the same level of desire to know more of coffee. Like the reference you use with wine. I love drinking wine, but I don't necessarily have that same desire that I do within coffee to learn everything about it. I just want a repeatable experience. But it doesn't mean to say if there was a cool wine tasting that I wouldn't go along and perhaps accidentally learn a bit more that would inform my future kind of buying decisions. So I suppose it is about making the education accessible as well as being generally accessible, so that the cupping events don't just go to an echo chamber of people already in coffee. It's reaching a wider audience, like the people listening to this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, places like Manchester Coffee Festival in particular, it's any sort of event that you go to, we get the opportunity to talk to, general public people from outside the industry is always amazingly fascinating, because you'll get some people that have been and spent literally thousands and thousands of pounds, and they'll reel off the list of all of the kit they've got and all of the gimmicks and the toys, and you're just like, wow, okay, I do coffee for a living, and I don't have that level of kind of intensity around my coffee making at home, and these guys are holding down a full-time day job, doing something else. So for all of those people, you're probably going to get another 15 or 20 people that will come and talk to you at an event and they'll stand there looking a bit sheepish. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I love coffee, that's why I've come, but can you help me? And I've never been to a festival before. And so, one of the things that we always try and do and thing that we really press with our baristas is, those are the people that you can have the most engaging conversations, because if you are open and accessible, and you may be repeating something you've said hundreds of times before, but if it's the first time that person's hearing it, what a great opportunity to have that special moment with them, and be able to just maybe unlock a little thing or give them something that 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, their knowledge keeps growing, and they perhaps then become the people that come back 2 or 3 years later having just gone crazy into the world of coffee. And that's the thing that's amazing about coffee festivals, and what makes the atmosphere and the vibe always so fun.
We agree.
Yeah, totally agree. That is one of the true joys of the coffee festival, is just seeing those people at the very start of their specialty coffee journey, and the excitement that they feel around the kind of world of discovery ahead of them. And I think one of the confusing things that we do as an industry for those people who are at the very beginning of their journey is we put roast dates on our coffee bags, because coffee is a volatile ingredient, it changes over time, but everyone puts different guidelines, I suppose, for when you should drink your coffee by, and I feel like maybe it would be nice to see some standardization to the way that roasters label their coffee. Do you think that would be helpful, Will?
It would be incredibly helpful. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it would be helpful. And kind of again, using different kind of food analogies. So when you say to someone, freshly baked bread tastes better than older bread, everyone gets it, because it's a linear diminishing return. It's never quite as good as that moment it comes straight out of the oven. The difference being with coffee is that actually we've got this very confusing message that you don't want it to drink it too quickly after it's been roasted, but by the same token you don't want to have it too old and too oxidized and staling. And identifying when that sweet spot is really difficult, because it can depend on the coffee, it can depend on the roast profile, it can we changed from a very traditional drum roaster to a Loring a couple of years ago. We've actually found that you now need to rest the coffee longer than we did previously. Wow. all of that is quite confusing. So then it's like, how on earth do you have a standardized thing which says, yes, buy freshly roasted coffee, but actually keep it in a cupboard for 10 days so it rests, and actually maybe this particular coffee is best 15 days off roast or 20 days off roast. I think as a general mantra, at least if you know when the roast date is, the chances are that whoever has produced, roasted that coffee has put an element of care and attention, because they're comfortable enough to tell you when that date was, because it's not coming out of a huge factory and it's one bag off pallets and pallets of coffee that may be sent around the country. And again, in terms of beginners' advice, if you're not sure, ask. Talk to the baristas, talk to the roaster, DM them on Instagram or the website. Everyone will always be happy to give you that bit of advice. Just accept that it may be incredibly confusing when we're saying, on the one hand, drink fresh coffee, it tastes best, and on the other hand, we're going, oh yeah, but don't drink it too fresh because you won't get the best out of it.
Yeah. I think the advice to ask is fantastic, because ultimately no one wants you to have a bad coffee experience, do they? If you're working in a coffee shop or for a roastery, that the desire really is for you to enjoy this product. So we can't kind of advocate enough for asking, and that's whether you're in the industry or outside of it. Wherever you're at, keep asking, because people pick up tips and tricks all the time, and it's just this never-ending wormhole where yes, you do want fresh coffee, but not this fresh. And also, again, I mean, and you go into the roast profile dictates how long, how you're brewing it can keep on going. And if you do ask, you might find you're unbelievably interested, or you don't care, but you've got the information you need to move forward. Asking is always great. Have you found that kind of, since you've done these reduced pieces of information on your bags and you've changed the information you present based on the research you've done, have you found people are receptive to it? Are you noticing more people speaking on the bags or asking more questions?
Yeah, there's been some really interesting kind of sort of unexpected consequences of change. So one of the oddest things is we changed from a craft bag to a recyclable bag with a soft touch paper feel as the kind of the finish that's on the bag. And the number of people that pick up the bag and now sort of stroke it, it's totally weird, the thing that you would have thought, but just that tactile nature of people feeling comfortable to pick up the bag and look at it and turn it over and read the back. It's just those small things that just give the consumer confidence to approach a retail unit or see something and think, oh, that looks interesting. We'll pick it up. And we've definitely seen that we now, in terms of our split of coffee sales, we sell more guest coffees than we did previously. And again, I think it's because all of a sudden you help people understand, well, why that, fairly low volume, micro lot, single origin coffee is costing more than the core house range. Why am I paying that, £1 or £2 more a bag? What should I expect? Why would it be different? And so for us, we think it's worked in terms of consumers just feeling that much more comfortable to experiment, try something new, and not have that fear factor. It's kind of quite difficult to quantify which particular element has made that impact. But for us and hopefully for our customers and people that have tried it, they're getting more from that coffee than they perhaps would have done previously.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. If people want to learn more about 200 Degrees and any other projects that you're involved in, where should they head to?
They should come see us at Birmingham Coffee Festival and Manchester Coffee Festival, because we will be at both, and I will be there for all days. And we've for those that haven't kind of heard of 200 Degrees before, 200degs.com, and we've got 18, soon to be 19, our 19th coffee shop opens in Chester later this month. So come on in. Hopefully you get a friendly reception. You can speak to baristas who will give you the time and help guide you through what you need so you can drink better coffee.
Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Super interesting and thought-provoking. And for those of you listening, keep on listening because we will now play the recording of Will's presentation from Manchester Coffee Festival 2022. Thanks for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Brewing It Over.
So, why are you here? Who's been in that situation where you panic buy coffee? You go into the supermarket and you stand there, and I do this with wine, and you look and you go, right, I know I need some coffee. What on earth am I going to buy? Where do I start? How am I going to find something that I really like and that's going to meet what I need? Or it could be worse. You panic buy and you don't buy coffee because you feel the pressure to make a decision, and then you go, oh, it's just all way too stressful, and I'm going to leave. So you walk into that type of environment. If you're really not sure, how do you start to kind of find a way in so that you can get something which you really, really enjoy? So you might be here to heckle me. I know there's kind of a few people at the back that are going to be doing that. So just to kind of explain who I am and what I do. So this was a much younger, marginally more handsome version of me 20 odd years ago. I started off working as a coffee trainer for a company, and yeah, we drove around in those cars as the coffee police, fighting bad coffee crimes, helping people to drink better coffee. And, that's what I've been trying to do over the last sort of 20 years. And, one of the things is that, coffee can be quite inaccessible sometimes, but it's fun. It's such a lovely product. And, you just want everyone to enjoy that particular cup of coffee they've got. So it could also be that you're fed up of buying coffee that then doesn't meet your expectations because you pick it up and you say that it's going to taste of strawberries. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. And it tastes nothing like strawberries. Or you buy some really expensive coffee and you think, oh, I've paid £15 for this bag. And then you've burned all the way through it before you actually get a cup of coffee that really tastes as you want it to. It's just... that's not cool. We don't want to do that. It's a waste of money. So what we've got here is the background shot to the McDonald's advert. I don't know how many people who remember having seen the McDonald's advert. And essentially what it did was show lots of people going into specialty coffee shops and being absolutely bamboozled by the terminology, by the type of cups that were being served, by the way the barista spoke to them, whether they got a smile, whether they didn't. And it was kind of quite polarizing when it launched in terms of some people taking a massive affront to it and thinking it was denigrating specialty coffee and how dare they poke fun at us. Like I was firmly on the other side of the fence that, if that's how your guests or your customers perceive the interaction they have with you, that's not helpful. So jam, clearly got nothing to do with coffee, but bear with me. So there was an experiment that took place in the mid-90s, and it was kind of termed the paradox of choice. And the fact that is, when you give people more choice, they're less able to make a decision. So what they did was they went into a supermarket and they had a little store with 6 jars of jam, and they got about 40% of people to come and try them. And of those people, just over half actually bought something. They then did the same experiment and they gave people 24 jars of jam. More people tried it, but less people bought because they couldn't decide what they actually wanted. So that's the kind of the idea in terms of try to keep things simple, find what you like, find a way in, and then go from there. So the reason this kind of came about is we wanted to change our packaging, and we were talking to our guests that come into our coffee shops, and the type of feedback that we were getting was, do you add flavour to coffee beans? It says caramel on the front. Has it got caramel in it? Obviously it is possible that you can do that. We had a lot of people that we spoke to thought that a blend meant it had other things added other than coffee, whether it had lemon or whether it had some berries or spice mixed in with it. We also had a lot of people, the biggest barrier was the fact they didn't speak Spanish and they didn't feel comfortable to actually pronounce the name that was on the bag. Siobhan at the front that works with me learned today how to pronounce Tenango, which is not something that rolls off the tongue. And, if you don't feel confident to be able to ask for that, then you just end up feeling as a consumer a bit kind of foolish. The other thing is, and I do this with wine, I had a really great coffee, but I can't remember what it was. And so then I don't know how to then buy it and enjoy it again. And also a lot of people just look, I really enjoyed that coffee. I want to buy some coffee that's that. Nice and simple. So we're going to remember the expert in anything, was a beginner at some point. And what we wanted to do was try to kind of rate, where consumers go on their journey of, kind of understanding about different coffee. So at the basic end, I know I should buy beans. I don't really know where to start. And then kind of obviously third wave coffee is massive. So people can go to Starbucks, they kind of know what their favorite recipe is. Then it could get to a stage where, your local independent, you started buying the beans that they have regularly through the bar. And then you get to the point where you're starting to explore a little bit more. You're starting to go different regions. You're only drinking fresh coffee. And then at that point you go, it's almost become a religious event. I absolutely know what I want from my coffee. I understand what the difference between washed and natural is. And you can get that view. So nobody goes straight to number 5. So this talk, if you're at number 5, amazing. You're probably not going to learn anything new, because this is more about, 1, 2, and 3. It's a beginner's guide to coffee bags. So where to start? Hopefully that's not the experience when you ask your barista about what type of coffee you should buy. Definitely where to start is speaking to the people that in the shop that you're dealing with. You can ask them questions. You can talk to them about the type of coffee you want. And hopefully you found today that most people like sharing their knowledge and they want to help you kind of get the best coffee you can. Wine label. The whole thing about wine and coffee is quite an interesting kind of comparable. And also you've then got this thing about perception and cultural bias and cultural kind of views as to what things mean. So if we ask an English person what a bus looks like, that's a bus. If you ask someone in Guatemala what a bus looks like, it looks like that. It's a chicken bus, because those are the things that we just kind of grown up with and we understand as part of our kind of cultural being. Same thing, English fish and chips. Everyone would agree that's fish and chips. But again, if you ask someone from Central America and Peru, that's what they think fish and chips looks like. So you've always got to remember there's a bit of context in terms of different people have different levels of experience and they probably approach things in a slightly different way. So 3 questions I would always ask before you're going to start buying some coffee beans. How will you brew it? So if you're going to brew it in a stovetop mocha pot, your coffee choice is going to be very, very different to a V60 or an AeroPress. And it doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's just like start with that as a starting point. Because if you know you're going to be putting it through your home machine and you want to make a beautiful cappuccino, there are certain coffees instantly you go, well, actually, that's less appropriate to how I want to actually enjoy that drink. Secondly, how will you drink it? So will you put milk in it? Do you want it as a short drink? Do you want it as a long drink? Do you want it as an iced drink? Do you want to brew it as cold brew? That again will start giving you the selection to sort of narrow it down. And thirdly, why will you drink it? So, first thing in the morning, your coffee requirements might be very different to middle of the afternoon to the end of the day. There are certain times I need a coffee, like I need a coffee. And there's other times I want a coffee, and it might be a very different experience. I might set a little bit more time aside for it. I might have more time to grind it, brew it, and, sort of enjoy that whole thing. Whereas first thing in the morning, I'm thinking, I need to get on the M1. I need a coffee to get me through that journey. And that will influence how I then decide which coffee I want. We've got lots of different examples of coffee bags that we're going to bring up. And we're going to start kind of working our way through some of the messages that you have on those bags. How do you then start to get to the coffee that you really want? So the first thing you'll see is, a blend or a single origin. So the one on the left, Modern Standard, Momentum Espresso, is a blended coffee. It's their core house espresso range. It's consistent. You can go and buy that, month in, month out, and it will taste the same. Predictable, easy, and blends are always a good starting point because you can buy it consistently. You can learn how what you do in terms of how you brew it impacts on how you actually then get flavor out of it. And then we've got, a single origin here. So a beautiful one from North Star, who are just over there. So this has come from Rwanda. So we know that's going to have more probably singularity of flavor profile. It's probably not something they're going to have month in, month out because it's fresh crop, it will change. And so really those are the starting points. So if you're a really, really newbie, I would always start with a blend, get with a blend that you're really comfortable with, learn how to get the best out of it before you get super excited about buying some like mega expensive coffee, getting it home, and then wondering why it tastes disastrous because you just haven't brewed it in the right way. So if we look at, kind of blends and what they might be, they also might be that mix of Arabica and Robusta. So I'm sure all of you have heard the difference between them. One is not better than the other. They just do different things. Robusta, gets a bit of a bad rap, but actually if you're drinking an espresso and you want that blend to be really consistent, really easy to dial in and really easy to make coffees with. And you're also going to whack a whole load of milk in it because you like a latte or a cappuccino. There's a place for having Robusta in there. Arabica tends to be more delicate, less caffeine, grows at higher altitude. It's going to be more expensive. So obviously you've got that premium there in terms of price. But again, what's most appropriate for how you're going to be drinking it? So if we look at origin, you can see this one is one that's come from Panama. So they've helpfully put a little map on the front of it, and we're all coffee growing in this romantic vision. And again, very much like wine, the terroir of the country, the soil, the type of plant that it is, all of that stuff is going to have an impact. So you can see here is kind of pretty high altitude. It's probably going to be somewhere in the highlands. It's not, mass farmed commercial coffee that can be stripped and, picked by machines. All of this is going to be handpicked just by the nature of the environment. So we've grown our lovely, beautiful, ripe red cherries. We've harvested them. So the next kind of thing that leads you onto on your coffee bags is how is the coffee being processed? So when we say processing, or you see a processing as a descriptor, all it means is how do you take the fruit off the cherry and leave you with the seeds that you're going to grind up and brew as your coffee. So with this one, you can see, well, you might not be able to see because it's pretty small, washed anaerobic method. Don't even concern yourself what that means. Just know that it's fairly fancy and experimental. And all we want to think about is something a little bit simpler at the moment. Fundamentally, how do we get the seeds out of the cherry? We can naturally process. So that's the coffee beans on the top. So once that fruit has been laid out in the sun and the cherry is hardened, we can then mill it to be able to take the cherries and the fruit away to leave us the seeds. And you tend generally, and we are talking massive generalizations, the results are going to be sort of deeper, richer, slightly more kind of earthy in flavor notes. It's sometimes you'll get certain naturally processed coffee that almost kind of smells of tomato soup. Like if you've never smelt it before, it's a very distinctive. If you smell someone grinding some coffee and you think, wow, what's that? It's probably natural process because it's just got a very distinctive aroma to it. So these are the drying beds. You can see African raised beds, so it keeps it off the ground. The air circulates, the fruit dries, and we get that lovely, rich, kind of smooth coffee. The other main principal way is to wash it, and that's the coffee that's on the bottom. So these washed coffees will generally be a little bit brighter, a little bit cleaner. They're using fermentation in the water as the sugars in the cherries break down. So the cherry starts to kind of drift off the actual seeds that's in the middle. And you then get drying wet processing containers with the guys on the right here are raking the coffee over and over again to break up all of that loose fruit that started to soften as it started to ferment. And then from that, we should get a cleaner, slightly sweeter tasting cup of coffee. So we've got our cherries. We've now got our green coffee. So the next thing that's going to start having an impact, and is something for you guys to look out when you're picking coffee up the supermarket shelf, is the roast level. So some roasters you can see have got, like these guys here have got a little gradient there, 4 dots along. And that's a good kind of indication and a good kind of gateway to think, well, if it's something darker roasted, generally, and we are talking massive generalizations, it's probably more suited to espresso or kind of sort of harsher kind of brewing methods. If it's lighter roasted, it's probably more suitable to either single espressos or for, drip or AeroPress, that style of coffee. So again, you've got another little visual cue. All right, that's going to give me a guide as to whether I'm going to like it or not. And the thing is, cooking coffee or roasting coffee is very much like making toast. So I'm sure, you've all seen the tea scale. Everyone has their very particular color that they like their toast or their tea. Similar thing happens with coffee. You start to get that Maillard reaction and you get that caramelization that starts to bring a different flavor dimension to, you've started off with the same product. The degrees in which you've toasted it is obviously transformed the type of flavor that you get out. So this is how they'd be roasting kind of a lot of coffee in Ethiopia. So the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, very kind of rudimentary, using that hot skillet. It's quite ferocious in terms of the smoke. Obviously, we've not got a hugely even kind of roast profile. Sure, any of you that work in the trade or any of you that were buying a bag of coffee that looked like that would be fairly horrified. You should be horrified if that's how your coffee looks like, if you pay good money for it. What we want is, kind of the roaster to put some care and effort and attention to, getting that coffee to its optimum in terms of its roast profile. So Again, if you've never seen that roasting process, when you're roasting coffee, you get a lovely kind of toasty aroma. It's quite kind of grassy and greeny as the moisture starts to come out of the coffee. And then we go through to the point where the coffee beans pop or crack, as popcorn would do. And that's when we're then starting to bring out those very typical coffee-type flavors. We could drink coffee in the second stage, but it would be super grassy. It wouldn't be pleasant. It wouldn't have any of those characteristics that we would want and expect from our coffee. So the next thing is, we know how it's been roasted. When has it been roasted? So this is where it becomes super, super tricky, because there isn't a golden hard and fast rule where you say fresh coffee is always better than old coffee. And the reason being is when you very, very first freshly roast coffee, it releases lots of CO2. So when you pick up your coffee bags, you'll also see there's a little white plastic valve on the front of them. So, affectionately, kind of termed as the smell hole by some people because they think it's a marketing gimmick, so you can smell the coffee coming out. Yes, it is. It's good for that. But also it allows the gas to escape out. So if we try and make coffee with coffee that's literally just off roast, it's too volatile. It's too inconsistent. You'll just end up, if you're brewing it through your espresso machine, you'll get a whole kind of cup full of crema and it'll just be really unsatisfying, gaseous, and it'll be bitter because CO2 is bitter. But it's useful to know when the coffee's been roasted because then that knows how long it's been sat there. It's also useful because it's a quality indication to know that the roaster, whoever they may be, really cares about that coffee. And it's not a product that's gone onto the supermarket shelf where, like I'm sure you do the same thing, you need something with the best before date, you reach to the back and you take the freshest coffee. Supermarkets hate us doing that. We all do it, the supermarkets hate us. So a lot of these products, they'll have an 18-month shelf life because coffee doesn't go bad. And, all that happens is you're getting a reducing kind of, impact in terms of that coffee. So as a broad rule, try and get coffee within 6 weeks of roast. Some coffee is better in the first week. Some coffee might be better in the second or third, but we're keeping it super simple, so let's go for the 6 weeks as a nice, easy kind of benchmark. And then we go into tasting notes. So there we go, beautiful kind of strawberry, brown sugar, rum. And you go, wow, that sounds amazing. But actually, how do you start to get those flavors out? And, where do those tasting notes come from in terms of a descriptor? And this comes from this thing, which is the flavor wheel, which I know loads of you will have seen. And all we're then doing is we're starting at that main characteristic. So it might be fruity. And then we're identifying, is it citrus fruits? Is it berry? You then start to expand out, well, actually, what type of citrus fruit is it? Is it a grapefruit? Is it lemon? All of those things will start to help kind of inform how that actually coffee is going to taste. And the next thing we've then got is the varietal. So this is a washed Caturra. So we know washed is the processing method because we've just covered that. And coffee cherries are very much like apples. So apples will taste very, very different depending on what their variety is. There are millions of different varieties of apples. There are loads of different varieties of coffees, and at the point where you're starting to know the difference between a pink bourbon and a Caturra or a Catois, like you don't need to be in this room. Like you need to be out there drinking some coffee. So these are examples of some of the kind of key varietals. So yellow bourbon, very popular from Brazil. And then you get some slightly more interesting ones like Alfante, obviously, because it's elephant sized in comparison to the others. And you also get some of those newer ones that are coming through that, people are doing hybrids or they're kind of creating new and exciting types of coffee. So what did we learn when we went through the process as, kind of redesigning our bags? We tried to strip everything back and try and keep it super simple. So house beans, consistent, it's a blend, it's easy, straightforward. We decided to put a roasting scale on. It actually doesn't really mean anything, but it's helpful in terms of giving the average consumer that way in to be able to understand the coffee they're buying. We've not put any Spanish on it, and we've not put any varietal on it. We've not put any processing methods on it. We've given you a nice description. So our signature espresso blend, the heart of which comes from Brazilian highlands, as served in our coffee shops. Super simple, nothing complicated, nothing intimidating. What we also then did on the back is we've got the QR code so that if you do want to know the farm it came from and you want to know the processing method, you can go and get all of that information because as you go through your journey, you want to know that. But hopefully that makes it easy so you feel comfortable to pick it up, read it and go, I kind of know what I'm going to get here. I'm not going to be too freaked out by expecting it to be like, funky pineapple or whatever it is in terms of the flavor. So think of it We thought of it as like the dairy milk. There's not many people who don't like dairy milk. Like if I'd have been productive enough to give them some samples, I'm sure everyone would eat dairy milk. We also like single origin dark chocolate. There's similar analogies, but actually, the times when you just need a bit of a chocolate fix, what you would go for may change. And one is not better than the other because it's about what you want. You're eating it. Nobody should be telling you whether your chocolate is better or worse than anybody else's. And so for our guest beans, we wanted to make it really clear that they're a guest. They're only visiting. They're not going to be around forever. And on this, we've color coded. So African coffees generally tend to be this kind of peachy color. We've given very, very clear tasting notes because at that point, you're starting to go down the journey of, I want something a little bit different, a little bit more nuanced. And again, we've kept the roast scale on there. That's lighter roasts. So actually it's going to be a little bit more delicate. It's not going to be quite as robust as some of those other coffees might. So question, what's the best coffee to buy? There's no answer to that. Now you might choose that you like pretty bags and these are beautiful bags, and you might go, I'm going to feel happy and I'm going to get value from that because, they're all beautiful works of art. You might decide that you want to go for, award-winning coffee. So, Darkwoods just out here, amazing coffees, win great taste awards, or you've got Grumpy Mule, have got some great taste awards there as well. You might like unusual coffee. So Fried Hats is a roaster in Amsterdam. You can order it to the UK. You'll pay an absolute fortune for it. It's amazing. But unless you're really comfortable to do that, then I'd probably suggest not a good idea. Black Ivory coffee. So I'm sure loads of you know about Kopi Luwak and the civet cat poo coffee. That's elephant poo coffee. So again, unusual. No desire to want to try that in any way, shape or form, but you could probably pay a lot of money. And then here you've got green tip geisha. So super high end, super exclusive. You're going to be paying a lot for those coffees because of how unusual they are. Or it might be you just want really provocative coffee because you're the type of person who just goes, I want Death Wish. I just want the strongest coffee possible. And there are a whole load of people that's literally their main purpose. That's why they want to drink it. They just want to blow their head off. They want to just be bouncing around the room for the rest of the day with the highest possible caffeine. Dark arts. Any of you that don't follow dark arts, if that kind of humor or kind of tone of voice gets you, they just do the best socials, best video, YouTube channel. It's really funny. So out of all that, what's the best coffee to buy? Literally, it's the one that you enjoy. Try to understand and follow those 3 questions in terms of, actually, how am I going to drink it? How am I going to brew it? How do I want to enjoy it? So that you're less disappointed. Nobody wants to be spending money and wasting money on coffee that's really expensive and then not getting the best out of it. So buy fresh coffee. Clean your coffee machine. It's a radical concept. So my brother-in-law bought an amazing, high-end single group machine. Oh, coffee's not tasting quite as good as it was. And then you look at it and you go, it was black because you've not cleaned it. So at a very basic level, clean your coffee machine, use filtered water, and understand your coffee grinder. So best thing to do if you're buying coffee, buy a coffee grinder, either a hand grinder or a manual grinder, and know how that works. Most people's level of disappointment comes from the grinder not being set properly as a kind of a big ticket item that you need to get sorted. So show someone, ask someone, watch YouTube videos, go to a barista school, whatever it is, so that you learn. So you're setting yourself up to give you the best chance to get what you want, those beautiful flavor notes, so you can actually get them from your coffee. Let's stay curious. So this was something I learned last week. If any of you have ever watched Ted Lasso, so I knew one of me, but I like the concept of staying curious. So ask questions. If I didn't enjoy that, why didn't I enjoy it? Try to go back and interpret so that you're less disappointed the next time that you then go to buy coffee or brew coffee yourself. So if you've got any questions, you can either ask me now, or you can ask me I'm on the stand, or you can email me. Yeah. Any questions? Thank you very much.